If you have saved $1,500,000 for retirement in Canada, people keep telling you that you have made it. You maxed out the RRSP for years, watched the balance climb past that number, and on paper, you are looking at somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000 a year for the rest of your life. There is a piece missing from that math, and it is not the market. Most plans built around $1,500,000 assume your spending stays smooth, roughly the same amount every month from 65 to 90. Real life rarely works that way. A single $30,000 roof or a $50,000 stretch of home care can hit in 1 year and pull down 3 years of growth at once. I have watched people get blindsided by exactly this. Not because they saved wrong, but because nobody warned them the curve is not actually smooth. That gap between the number on your statement and the number you actually get to live on is the whole story. Miss it, and $1,500,000 can start to feel like $800,000 the year the furnace dies, and a hip needs replacing in the same winter. Today, we are not running the best case spreadsheet. We are stress testing $1,500,000 against the OAS clawback and against the chaos years nobody plans for, so you can see what this money actually buys you once life gets messy. If you are within 5 years of retirement and trying to protect what you built from the CRA and from inflation, hit subscribe. We build for the messy middle of retirement, not just the clean projections. Start with the simple version. A $1,500,000 portfolio using a 4% withdrawal rate generates roughly $60,000 a year. That part is not controversial. Most retirement calculators agree on it. What a lot of those calculators leave out is what happens the year you need more than that. In 2026, the OAS clawback threshold sits at $95,323 in net income. Go above that line, and the government takes back 15 cents of your old age security for every dollar over it, on top of whatever income tax you already owe. Pull a large lump sum out of your RRSP for a renovation, and you can cross that line without ever changing your day-to-day lifestyle. Most retirement plans are built on what is often called the go-go, slow-go, no-go curve. The idea is that you spend the most in your active years right after retiring, spend less as you slow down in your 70s, and spend the least once you are past 85 and staying close to home. It is a tidy story, and for a lot of people it is wrong. The no-go years are not actually cheap. In Canada, long-term care or the modifications needed to stay safely in your own home can turn 85 into your most expensive year, not your least expensive one. The curve assumes decline is quiet. Sometimes it sends you a bill instead, the same way a pharmacy copay that used to be an afterthought can quietly turn into a monthly line item once a prescription list gets longer. Here is what that looks like with real numbers. Say your portfolio sits at 60% stocks and 40% fixed income, and you are drawing $8,000 a month, about $96,000 a year, already just above the $95,323 threshold. Your roof fails and you need $30,000 for a repair. Pull that from your RRSP and you are not only paying tax on it, you are also losing close to $4,500 in OAS the following year. A $30,000 repair ends up costing you nearly $45,000 once you count the lost benefit and the growth that money would have earned. None of this means $1,500,000 is not enough. It means the plan needs room built in for the years that refuse to follow the script. Your retirement is not a straight line on a graph. It is a series of flat stretches interrupted by sudden cliffs, and the cliffs rarely show up on the calculator you used to decide you were ready. Most of those calculators are built to answer whether the average holds up, not what happens the 1 year it does not. Spending is not the only place the government is watching the clock, though. The bigger lever might be sitting in when you actually start collecting. Here is a number most retirees never run. Wait until age 70 to start CPP instead of taking it at 65, and your monthly benefit goes up by 42% permanently for the rest of your life. For someone sitting on $1,500,000, that is close to the only guaranteed raise left in the entire plan. Most people do not wait. They start CPP at 60 or 65 because they do not trust it to still be there later, or because taking the money now simply feels safer than trusting a government program. That instinct is understandable. It is also usually the more expensive choice. One way around the tension is what some planners call an RRSP meltdown. Between 65 and 70, instead of leaving the RRSP alone, you draw from it more aggressively to cover living costs while you delay CPP and OAS. That does two things at once. It shrinks the RRSP before you hit 72, when the government requires you to start taking mandatory minimums out of a RRIF, whether you need the income that year or not. And it buys you a much larger, fully guaranteed CPP and OAS payment starting at 70, one that rises with inflation and lasts as long as you do. The RRIF minimum exists because Ottawa wants its tax revenue eventually, not because it knows what you personally need that year. Past 72, the required withdrawal percentage keeps climbing every year you age, whether the market is up or down. A smaller RRIF balance going into that stage means smaller mandatory withdrawals, which means less taxable income colliding with the OAS clawback line later on. The trade-off is real and worth saying plainly. You are spending down savings faster in your late 60s, so your income floor is higher and safer for the following 20 or 30 years. Some people are simply not comfortable watching their RRSP balance drop, even when the math favors it. Look back at what happened to portfolios in 2008 or in 2022. Retirees who had a larger guaranteed floor from CPP and OAS reported far less panic selling during those downturns than people relying almost entirely on their own portfolio. A bigger guaranteed check does not stop the market from falling. It changes how much that fall actually threatens your month-to-month life. There is a quieter worry underneath all of this, and it is not about the market at all. If you are spending down the RRSP faster in your 60s, what does that leave for your kids? A lot of Canadians who reach $1,500,000 quietly become hoarders without ever deciding to. Not hoarders in the dramatic sense, just people who underspend by roughly $20,000 a year through their 60s, because the chaos budget scares them more than the alternative. Do that for 2 decades, and you can leave behind a $2 million estate, mostly taxable, to children who are themselves 50 years old and already financially settled. Nobody chose that outcome on purpose. It happens one skipped trip and one deferred decision at a time. I used to think the goal was to die with the largest number possible on the statement. I was wrong about that. The goal is to die having pulled the most life out of the money while you still had the health to use it, not having protected a balance nobody gets to enjoy until you are gone. Here is a way to hold both things at once: the instinct to protect your kids and the need to actually live. Set aside 10% of the portfolio, $150,000, as a legacy floor, money that is simply not touched and goes to your family no matter what else happens. Set aside another $50,000 as a chaos reserve for the roof, the furnace, the unplanned bill. Everything left over is yours to spend on your own life, without running a guilt check every time you book a flight. Guilt-free does not mean unplanned. It still means paying the property tax bill and the hydro bill before anything else. Then choosing, on purpose, to spend a portion of what is left on your own life instead of parking it in the account by default, the way you have for decades. Run the numbers on what caution actually costs. Skip 2 $10,000 trips in your 60s to save for a rainy day. Let that $20,000 grow at 5% for 20 years. and you have added about $53,000 to what your kids eventually inherit. In exchange, you gave up the trips at the exact age when your knees, your energy, and your travel partner were all still available. Nobody gets that trade back later. This is not a permission slip to spend recklessly. It is a reminder that the money you are protecting so carefully has an expiry date attached to your own ability to enjoy it, and no amount of saving buys that back. The legacy floor and the chaos reserve already protect your family and your future self, which frees up everything else to be spent without a second audit. Guilt-free spending sounds fine on a whiteboard. It gets a lot harder to say out loud the year the market drops 20% right after you retire. Picture the worst realistic combination, not the worst possible one. Markets drop 20% in your very first year of retirement, and inflation runs at 4% at the same time. This is not a hypothetical exercise. It has happened to real retirement cohorts before, and it is the single scenario that does the most damage to an otherwise solid $1,500,000 plan, more damage than a single bad year of returns arriving later on. Someone without a plan for this keeps withdrawing the same $8,000 a month, no matter what the account balance says, which means selling shares while they are down just to cover groceries and the mortgage payment. Researchers call this sequence of returns risk, and it behaves differently from an ordinary bad year. Selling into a crash locks in the loss permanently, and the math behind it can shorten a $1,500,000 portfolio's life by 7 to 10 years, compared with the exact same average return arriving in a different order. Two retirees can earn the identical average return over 30 years and end up in completely different places, purely because of which year the crash landed in. Someone who planned for it does something almost boring by comparison. They keep 2 years of spending, about $192,000 sitting in high-interest savings or short-term GICs before the drop ever happens. When the market falls, they simply stop selling stocks and live off that cash instead, giving the rest of the portfolio room to recover before it has to sell anything. That 2-year cash buffer is not an arbitrary number either. Looking back across Canadian market history, a 2-year buffer has been enough to let the rest of the portfolio recover from roughly 90% of past downturns without ever selling a single share at a loss. Holding that cash comes at a real cost. It earns less than the market over time, so you are giving up some long-run growth in exchange for the ability to sleep through a crash instead of watching the balance every morning. Most people who have lived through one bad year decide that exchange is worth making, and most people who have never lived through one still think they would rather chase the extra growth. None of this accounts for the biggest asset a lot of $1,500,000 retirees are sitting on without really thinking about it. A house worth close to $800,000 sitting right under them. Most Canadians who reach $1,500,000 in savings are also sitting on somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million in home equity, and most of them never count it as part of the plan. The house sits off to the side in their head, untouchable, reserved for whoever inherits it. There is another way to see that same house. Instead of treating it like a shrine you are keeping for the kids, treat it as a long-term care fund that happens to also be where you live right now. That resistance to using it is not irrational. For most of your life, the house has been the one asset you were never supposed to touch. The thing that stayed put while everything else in the portfolio went up and down. Treating it as a resource instead of a monument is a mental shift, not a financial one, and it tends to take longer to make than the math itself does. Here is when that shift actually matters. If a chaos expense goes past your $50,000 reserve, say a $100,000 need for private care that the public system will not fully cover, A reverse mortgage or a home equity line of credit gives you a way to reach that capital tax-free without selling the house or moving out of it. Neither option touches the portfolio you are relying on for everyday income, which matters most if that market drop from earlier happens to land in the same year as the repair bill. You are, in effect, spending part of what would have been the inheritance to protect your own quality of life right now. I do not know your family's situation, but most adult children would rather see their parent well cared for today than inherit an extra $200,000 a decade from now. That is a conversation worth having out loud, not just assuming. Start with what your own household would call a chaos number. Walk through your list, the age of your roof, the age of your furnace, your dental history over the last 10 years, and put a real figure on what could hit in the next 5 years. Once you have that number, park it in its own TFSA so it is not competing with your everyday spending account. Next, run your own OAS clawback check. If your projected income for the year is likely to land above $95,000, that is worth a conversation with a planner about whether an RRSP meltdown between 65 and 70 makes sense for your situation. Before the RRIF minimums at 72 make the decision for you. This is a math question, not a loyalty test, so bring your actual numbers rather than a rough guess. Then take one small step in the other direction. Pick a day this month and spend $500 on something that makes your actual life easier or more enjoyable, without asking permission from your own guilt first. Treat spending as a skill you are relearning, not a moral failure you are committing. It will feel wrong at first. After 30 or 40 years of saving, spending on purpose can feel like breaking a rule, even when the math says you are allowed to. That instinct served you well on the way to $1,500,000. Left unchecked, it is the same instinct that quietly shrinks the life that money was supposed to fund. $1,500,000 is plenty, as long as the plan leaves room for the years that are not smooth. Plan for the lumpy expenses instead of assuming an average month forever. Watch the OAS clawback line before a large withdrawal, not after, and stop protecting a legacy so carefully that you forget to spend on the life the money was actually meant to fund. You already did the hard part. You saved consistently for decades, through market drops, and through years when it would have been easier to spend more and worry less. That work is finished. What is left is the harder, less familiar work of actually living on what you built, without treating every dollar spent as a dollar lost. Subscribe to Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook to keep your $1,500,000 protected from the 3 things most likely to erode it quietly over time, taxes, inflation, and your own hesitation to spend.